Hey guys, my name is Brittany. If you came over from my other channel, this is probably an extremely different setup than you're used to seeing. As you can see, I'm set up here to do a tutorial with the program Blender. So if you're searching for some basic Blender animation tutorials, you are in the right place. And I know that there are tons and tons of tutorials for Blender online. But the reason I decided to start this series is because I know that everybody learns a little bit differently, and personally I always go through a few different channels before I find one that really works for me. So if other people are able to relate and benefit from these videos, then that's great. And I'm also still learning my way around Blender as well, so making these videos definitely helps me out too. As always, if you guys have anything to say or add, or any questions, or even like any corrections, please put them in the comments. I really want this to be a place where we all can just kind of learn together. Alright, so I'm assuming you guys have Blender open and your screen looks a little bit like mine. But before we get started moving things around, you're going to want to think about what kind of hardware you're using. And by hardware, I just mean like what kind of computer you're using. But the good thing about Blender is that regardless of how old your computer is or how old your PC is, the program runs pretty smoothly regardless. You do want to make sure that you have enough space on your computer for all of your Blender files, or if you don't want to have like all of your space taken up on your computer, you can just use an external hard drive or another external storage unit. Alright, now take a look at your actual computer. I think Blender works best with a full desktop and, a 3-button mouse and that whole hookup. But you can definitely still use it if you're using, say, like a laptop or a tablet, like a drawing tablet, instead of a mouse. Personally, I'm using a laptop and a mouse that has a scroll wheel. And in this case, the wheel will actually act as a third button on, that would be on a third button mouse. So I'll show you guys how to change these settings. So if you press Command and comma, or Control plus comma, if you're using a PC, I believe, that brings up the Blender user preferences. And I'll go over in a different video more about this section and what you can do in the user preferences. But for now, make sure that you are on the input section right here. And this input section is basically where you can customize how you communicate with Blender. So if you're on a laptop and you don't have a mouse or anything like that, click Emulate 3-button mouse right there, and you want to make sure that's checked. Emulate basically means equal in this situation. So when you click that, basically what you're doing is you're letting Blender know that you don't have a traditional third button from the 3-button mouse. And what you're going to be doing is matching that using a command from your computer. So to use the third button mouse on your laptop, what you're going to do is hit Alt and then left click, and that will act as the third button mouse or a scroll wheel. I am going to leave it unchecked because I am using a mouse in this case. The continuous grab is something that I usually just check personally. You can even check which buttons you select with your mouse right here. Emulate numpad is something that you want to check if you're on a laptop, because on a desktop you have a number pad, and on a traditional numpad the numbers work basically just to change different views. So since we don't have a numpad, we're gonna check that and let Blender know that we're just going to be using our regular 1 through 0 numbers on our laptop keyboard. So unless you have a traditional desktop keyboard with that numpad, you most likely are going to want to check this. Another really cool thing about this input section is that if you click on these drop-down menus over here, you can see all of your shortcuts right over here if you click on these. And a step even further than that is if you click up here and you come from a different animation program such as Maya or 3ds Max, you can actually go ahead and change your commands as if you were using one of these programs that you're used to using. Personally, I'm just going to leave it as Blender default because I am interested in learning Blender and the shortcuts of Blender and all of its settings and everything like that. So that's kind of what I'll be focusing on and the commands that I'll be using in my videos. But let's go ahead and save user settings and close our user preferences. And remember, we can bring that menu back up anytime by pressing Command and comma or Control and comma if you're on a PC. I also really hope you guys enjoy learning and using all of these shortcuts too. I find it speeds up a lot once you get started actually animating, so I think it's best to just learn them all as you go. So now that we're back in our scene here, and this is just our scene right here, we can see everything within our scene over here if we click scene, and we can see that we have a cube which is highlighted, we have a camera, and we have a lamp. We're going to highlight the cube again because that's really what we're going to be moving and working with, but that's how you can change between what's selected and what's not in your scene. But I will also go ahead and point out that we are in the global orientation, as you guys can see down here. And there are 5 different orientations that you can choose from. Later, as your projects go on, you might find that another one might be more appropriate for your use, but we're just going to stay in global for right now. But working in an orientation basically gives you absolute control of how your objects live within 3D space. And I'll talk about different orientations in another video, but we're also in object mode, as you guys can see over here. Object mode basically just means that we're working with whole entire objects, such as this cube right here. And to move this cube around, you can simply right click and drag it. You don't have to hold your mouse button down. You can let it go and it just stays with you. Even easier way to move objects around is to press hotkey G and grab your object to move it around like that. When doing this, you want to make sure that the correct object is selected that you're trying to move. As you can see, the object selected is highlighted in orange, so that's a really good way to know which object is selected when you're just pressing G, not directly clicking on the object that you want to move. Like if I wanted to move this camera over here, to press G, I'm still moving this cube even though my mouse is over the camera, so I would have to select that and use G, or I could just drag it with the mouse. So either way works. Either way is fine. Personally, I just like to use G, just because I always have a hand on the keyboard, so you may as well use hotkeys. Something else that you can do in object mode is move objects on specific axes. And if you guys have a mouse button, you can use this middle mouse button to just click and drag to move around to see how different things look. That's all I'm doing to move around my scene here. But the x-axis, which is in red, typically represents a side-to-side movement. The y-axis is front to back, and the z-axis is up and down. So you guys can see that represented by these arrows here. And also you have a little thing right here to remind you of where your axes are at all times. So to move an object on a specific axis, when you press G to grab it, you press an axis key, such as the x-axis or y-axis or z-axis. In this case, I'm going to press the z-axis, and as you can see, it's moving just up and down on the z-axis, which is pretty cool. You can also do the same things as rotating by hitting the R key and rotating on specific axes, such as the y-axis. We'll rotate on the y-axis here. That's just something that I can do. And I'm just left clicking to put it in place. Can also scale, which is just to make an object bigger or smaller. You're just scaling it by pressing S. and you can scale on a different axis as well. So we're gonna see what that looks like if I press Z after that and I scale on the Z axis. As you can see, it's only getting bigger up and down. So that's how that works. So another really cool feature that I think is really fun to work with is if you let's try scaling and on the x-axis and hold your middle button down, your middle mouse button down, or your third button down, and this lets you snap to a specific axis. So I think this is really cool, and you can do this with rotating or just scaling or grabbing. I'm just holding the middle button down. There we go. Alright, so the last thing I'm going to talk about or go over in this first video is numerical input. So basically using numbers for specific movements. For example, we'll hit R for rotate and enter number 75. The object rotates 75 degrees, and after 75 we'll just hit enter to confirm that movement. But the same thing applies if you wanted to grab and scale and enter numerical values. Entering numerical values can be really quick for flipping or mirroring objects, typically scaling by -1 along a particular axis mirrors an object. So that can be really useful for mirroring objects for like lakes or mirrors or reflections later. Just something that I think is really helpful and I personally want to remember. But I am going to wrap up this first tutorial here. If you did enjoy this video, please like and share and subscribe. I plan to make a lot more in-depth videos on Blender and possibly use it with some different hardware. There's just so much to explore, and I want to learn and document and share everything that I can. And if you guys have anything to add, please put it in the comments. And until next time, keep learning, keep creating, and I will see you guys in the next video.